Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Yesterday was the birth day of the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. I know these days Jawaharlal Nehru has become an object of ridicule and unnecessary, uncalled for vilification. Of course, this vilification is done by the people who have either no information or with the people who are mean, petty-minded. I agree that he might have done something wrong, but then a person who works would always do something wrong sometime. We had prime ministers who were there for 10 years. They did not do anything wrong because they did not act at all. I'm referring to MMS, Manmohan Singh. The vilification of Nehru is not something new if you look at the history. Yesterday's heroes always become villains of today. Look at Julius Caesar. This man refused to become a king 3 times. The crown was offered to him, he refused 3 times. And yet, his closest friend Brutus and others stabbed him to death, only stating that he was ambitious. Wartime hero, Prime Minister Churchill, the idol of the British nation, was dethroned unceremoniously as soon as the war was over, and all his work forgotten. Stalin, of whom people were in fear and admiration in England, in Soviet Russia, the moment he was away, the process of destanlization started. Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, the makers of the beginning creators of modern China, were the object of Deng's criticism. So this process of vilification is not something new historically, but this vilification is always done by those people who I said are petty-minded people, who are not only petty-minded but they are ignorant. If I look at the work that he has done, the compendium of the work, it's amazing. And there's hardly anybody else who has done that sort of work. And yet, he was bad. Let me say that I have known Jawaharlal personally. And my first interaction with him was absolutely amazing. It was 1957. I had seen him earlier, but from a distance. We had half an hour discussion on 3 different days, and the last time it was more than 2 hours. And he sent me to Egypt as his ambassador at the age of 15. So he was, in fact, and then I came to know what he was thinking. And as a matter of fact, I consider him the greatest prime minister at the time, not in India, but all over the world. And anybody who wants to understand India has to do so with a scientific temper which he promoted. I still recollect what I read in his Discovery of India. He wrote, I've always maintained that it was not her is India's wide spaces that eluded me, or even her diversity, but some depth of soul which I could not fathom, though I had occasionally and tantalizing glimpse it. She was like some ancient palimpsest on which layer upon layer of thought and tragedy had been inscribed, and yet no succeeding layer had completely hidden or erased what had been written previously. And these small men who smear him today do not understand the essential beauty of India, and that is why they cannot understand it. These small men have not encountered the challenges, otherwise they would have evolved into better understanding of history. Nehru recognized that the division between the classes and masses was more fundamental than the division between Hindus and Muslims. And that is why his more effort was to remove the division, the schism, the gap between the classes. I agree it was not the Ram Raja that the leaders of today talk. You remember 1952, the first general elections were held. It was a shadow of partition. Yet the communal rhetoric of the brazen religious polarization was not allowed to have any say. In 1950, he had called a meeting of the chief ministers, and with that, as administrator of PEPS who had attended it. And he said, so long as I'm the prime minister, I will not allow communalism to shape our policy, nor am I prepared to tolerate barbarous and uncivilized behavior. It was a clear-cut message to the politicians. And in spite of the great human tragedies of the initial years, he made sure that India charts a course of peaceful coexistence. After the birth of Pakistan, he made sure that India does not become a Hindu Pakistan. I have nothing against being a Hindu Pakistan, but as long as it doesn't divide the nation, it's okay. And the best safeguard was promoting tolerance, coexistence, committing the state to safeguard each religious group. Let's not forget that India was a very poor nation, but it was rich in composite culture. And preserving it was his thought. He made sure that the world pays attention to the way that India derives from the ancient culture. And these custodians of ancient culture today, they don't know what ancient culture is. As a matter of fact, the glimpses of the world history and discovery of India were my first introduction. And then I read Bhasham, the wonder that was in it. And then I started reading Vedas and Puranas and Darshans. And then the beauty of the Indian culture opened to me. It is saddening that those ideas are being ignored today. The most polarizing phase appears to be the more preferred phase today. Some leaders today do not wish to acknowledge that the whole electoral process has degenerated into a vote-catching device. And he was the most democratic leader. Had he not been a prime minister, India would have been another Pakistan or one of the countries of Africa. And let me tell you, he had such much of charm and charisma that if he wanted, he could have become a dictator. 1962, India had a humiliating defeat. And some opposition leaders went to Radhakrishnan and told him, why don't you dismiss Jawaharlal Nehru and invite somebody else? And he said, yes, I'll do it. And Jawahar is so democratic that he'll accept, resign, but he will go to Ramla ground and address people. And the people will re-elect him with resounding majority and he'll be back. So why do you want to do it? Prime Minister Nehru was the Prime Minister of this great country first and leader second. History remembers him even today. Contemporary politicians today and leaders must not forget that history will not remember them the way history remembers him, because majority of the leaders today are yes men. They don't have any spine. If you look at the cabinet of Jawaharlal, you will see what a great cabinet it was. C.D. Deshmukh as finance minister. People blame him, but then V.K. Krishna Menon. Intellectual, yes, he had his defects, I don't deny it, absolutely. But M.C. Chawla, a great jurist, and so on. So you must be distressed, and I am, that the citizen protesters and don't understand. He built up students, journalists, lawyers, the best sources that a vibrant country should have. Reflect on the independence and the democracy. The people who are vilifying Johar should not forget that they are doing so because he was the first Prime Minister. Had it been somebody else, say like Subhash Bose, or even Patel, whom I admire, both of them, but they had more totalitarian attitudes. And Johar was capable, as I said, of becoming a dictator. And he was a man who even promoted opposition. When Atal Bihari Wartime became an MP, he was patronized by Jawaharlal Nehru. And he could have been crushed, but no. An accountable parliament he built with opposing voices that reflect ethos of our country. Throughout his tenure, he ensured processes and institutions that define democracy are cemented. He could have done it. I remember Jawaharlal Nehru was very hesitant about dismissing the Kerala government of Namboodiripad, but he did so at the saying of at least half a dozen other leaders, which he didn't like. As a matter of fact, before I come to what he did, this was a mild person who with his mind and heart loved India and Indian people. And the people were of course indulgent to him. They loved him abundantly and extravagantly. I remember 27th of May when he died. The whole nation came to a stop. And the whole world was absolutely stunned. Now what are his main contributions? Secularism. Not the fake secularism, but the real secularism. And he was committed to that. And nothing wrong with that. Of course, the pseudo-secularism I detest. Because that's not secularism, that is partisanship. That is creating cloning groups. His biggest contribution was to the economy, 5-year plans. The first 5-year plan devoted to agriculture. Second to the basic industry and the main industry. Had it not been done, India would not have been the breadbasket of the world. And the cottage and small-scale industries made India's middle class strongest force in the world. People forget it. And at the same time, he saw to it that the steel industry, there was only one steel unit, Tata Steel. But he set up Durgapur, Bokaro, and so on. Built up the basic structure of the industry. As I said otherwise, had he not been there, or had some different person been there, lacking his vision, we would have been like what Congo became to be, like Rwanda, like Congo, like even South Africa. So both industry, basic and heavy, his product. And then look at his vision. He was the only man in the whole of Africa and Asia who thought of the nuclear energy as the first nuclear power plant. Cyrus plant from Canada during his time. And Bhabha Atomic Energy Center was set up. And I remember Homage Bhabha was given absolutely free hand. Would India have been that strong? Yes. He made an error in Kashmir in agreeing to a plebiscite. We should not have. As a matter of the basic complaint was wrong. Basic complaint that it's a dispute was wrong. It should have been that Pakistan is an aggressor. But then that was the duplicity of the US government, because US government wanted a puppet and in Pakistan, and Pakistan became its puppet, becoming a member of CETO and CENTO. And Nehru refused to be that. But then, with his vision, he knew. He was the man who set up the Bhakra Dam, Darbala Valley project, others. And when he inaugurated Bhakra Dam, I remember he said, "These are the temples of tomorrow." And these temples became the image of India. Agriculture, as I said, the first 5-year plan was dedicated to agriculture, absolutely. So whether it was secularism, whether it was economy, plans, industry, nuclear energy, name it, and in which part it was not successful. His only fault was that he was a believer in honesty. And he thought that when the Chinese were saying that they are friendly, they would not uproot the traditional feelings. And both countries had emerged from slavery, and they will march hand in hand. But when Chinese became colonizers themselves and invaded Tibet, he was the first man to offer refuge to Dalai Lama. And that's what really annoyed China. Now coming to that, throughout his 17 years, the longest serving Prime Minister, the only fault that can be laid to his door is one is the Kashmir issue, where the complaint to UN was wrong. And then he should not have agreed to the ceasefire. He should have ordered the army to keep on marching. But ceasefire was not his decision only. This was a combined decision of Jawaharlal, Patel, the cabinet. As a matter of fact, in cabinet he never forced his opinion and he always accepted it. And we had a very competent Governor General, Mountbatten, and then Chakrabarti, Rajaji. So they all wanted ceasefire, but yes, he should have asserted and not. Second was his absolute reliance on China. But if he did more than 100 jobs excellently, and most important, set up the democratic system, did not indulge in either totalitarian tendencies or in setting him up himself for president for life or doing anything which might denigrate the institutions that built up the democracy. He ensured that democratic institutions should be built up. And that required talent, that required vision, which he had. So on this day, this first Prime Minister deserves to be remembered with gratitude. And the petty minds who vilify him are in fact showing their bankruptcy of idealism, bankruptcy of knowledge, and incapability of being human and grateful. I admire that man. I admire him for the intense love that he had for the country. I admire him for his democratic outlook. I admire him for his defects, because that shows he was a human being. And as a human being, every human being has some positive points and some negative points, and he had them. But that doesn't take away anything away or discount in any way his capabilities, his service to the nation, and his commitment, most important. He was authentic and he never hesitated. I remember when I was going to Egypt, he told me, remember, you, the youth, are the hope of India. And after 3 months when I came back, gave my report to him. He said, people like you are going to make India the leader of the world. What we talk of the Vishab Guru today was contained on those lines, and the youth, as long as is capable of retaining the cultural heritage with scientific temperament, ability to absorb the foreign, the Western thought and not be impacted by it, but to analyze it and accept what is proper in continuation and in conformity with the culture of the country. That youth is needed by India, and you are one of them. Those words still ring in my ears. And I say, Jawahar, you were, are, a star in the firmament of the Indian skies. And howsoever these vilifiers, these abusers might abuse you, your brightness will never be dimmed. And you would always be remembered with affection by the millions and the billions of the people. Some people who are vulnerable might, and they do, abuse you. But in the heart of their heart knows that what they are doing is only an act of meanness. Jawahar was, Jawahar is, and Jawahar always will be the gem of India, the diamond that will never lose its luster. Jawahar, we remember you with gratitude and with thanks. We remember you as the architect of modern India, the architect who built up the democratic institutions, who consolidated the strengths, who ensured industrialization as well as agriculture progress to make India self-reliant. What we are talking to is our Atmanirbhar is derived from the actions of Jawahar. Thank you, Jawahar. And this day is a day of rededication to his ideals and thoughts. Thank you.